Welcome, everyone. I'm David. We're here at Ask the Pastor. Today is a very special episode. We are discussing why we should celebrate Juneteenth, which is a significant day for all of America. And so today we are broadcasting live from Love Akron on South Main Street in Akron. So we want to thank the folks at Love Akron for allowing us to be here today. Be sure to check out loveakron.org for all the wonderful work they're doing in our community. And a special shout out and thank you to Coach Kemp for allowing us to be here at Love Akron today. Our question of today is, why should we celebrate Juneteenth? And today is, in fact, Juneteenth. And so we're going to jump right into this. Let us introduce who we have with us here today. We have Eric Harris, who is retired. He's here to share with us his thoughts on Juneteenth, and Marv Hodges, who is pastor at Bridging the Gap Ministry. So we want to welcome you both here today. And as we start, share with us what Juneteenth is.
I'll take the lead on that. Juneteenth, is a celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation that was given by President Abraham Lincoln, which is a familiar statement for most people when they hear that. On that day of the emancipation, he declared freedom for all slaves in states still in rebellion. So that was talking about the southern states. At that point in time, the war was technically over, but they were still exercising their business rights in their mindset of having slaves at that point in time. But Lincoln issued that preliminary Emancipation Proclamation following the battle that was held at Antebellum on September 2nd, or 22nd rather, in 1862. And it was as a warning to the Confederacy, and to the official order went out on that time to take effect as of January 1, 1983. Now, they didn't have all of the technology that we have today, obviously, so they couldn't send a text message. They couldn't Zoom it. They couldn't use any of the other social media platforms that we have today. And so to get that message around, it took time. Why June 19th? Well, that 6-month story is based on the beginning, that ultimately it took 6 months by horseback to get all of the information around to those other states. And the final one actually being Texas. And when the word got to Texas, because Texas was still exercising their thoughtful right of slavery. And when I say thoughtful, I don't mean that in a positive sense. And so they were exercising their right to continue to do that. Well, the word finally got there, because they were considered of the Confederates. When it finally got there, the celebration began, hence June 19th.
So June 19th, that's when they finally heard
Yes.
news that everyone who was enslaved was now free.
Correct.
So that's why it's celebrated on June 19th.
Correct.
Well, wonderful. And what other regions celebrate June 19th or the Emancipation Proclamation?
Well, the regions per se that celebrated it were all of those initially, all of those who had the word, who had the wherewithal to have heard the word in regards to the war being over and that slaves were being set free based on federal law. And so any state that was considered a northern state, they heard it early, because that information, the horseback was a little easier to get to in those areas than it was to get it all the way to some other farther southern and southwestern areas of the country at that time to be able to get the information out. So other regions began celebrating it before June 19th per se, because they celebrated it not as an official holiday, but they celebrated the freedom. And we all know lots of other stories involving what transpired in those post-Civil War days, or the post-wars in regards to the freedom of this country for slavery to be no longer acceptable.
I want to add uh, all s- all areas wasn't honoring that. Like some of the northern states, like if I'm not mistaken, Maine,
Correct.
Kentucky, Ohio, they didn't really acknowledge the Emancipation Proclamation. They didn't really acknowledge that. So I don't know when they started acknowledging it, or when it took effect. But that's kind of a shame that they wouldn't acknowledge what had been going on
Right.
for 400 years. And the 400 years is over. And so then also I wanted to bring to light down in Texas when they finally realized that, hey, it's over with. We can no longer use these Americans, these people, to profit from. And so they wasn't really able to read and write during this slavery time. But afterwards, when they were able to read and write and learn, they were in schoolhouses. Grown people, was in schoolhouses with 7, 8-year-olds, and they were all learning the same thing at one time. And I thought that was pretty interesting.
So the slave owners did not allow those who were enslaved to receive an education,
Correct.
or only what suited their needs.
Correct. But you had some slaves that was doing it secretly. But if a slave owner found out what was going on, we know what would happen. They would get beat.
Right.
So,
And what was the risk of those who were enslaved gaining an education? What happens when we gain an education?
well, I guess we would know. We would be able to understand what our slave owners was doing or talking about or had in store for us. And I believe at some point the slaves knew that freedom would come, and they would be more prepared for it. The ones who did know how to read and write and comprehend and understand, and they would be more prepared for what's ahead for them.
Yeah, so like that knowledge that we have is power.
Yeah,
If
exactly.
we know, then we can act to do something about it.
It's like today, knowledge is power. The more you know, the more it will help you financially.
Right, in many ways. Yeah.
Well, even though we're making a point of focusing in on Juneteenth, I want to just thank you for that, Eric, because I want to highlight something that's really important to whomever may be listening at this point in time, whomever may listen later, is that it has been common to man to have oppressors and oppressed. And so we're speaking specifically today about Juneteenth and the African Americans that were oppressed. And then the highlight came from the place of education and what that does. Well, it has been the custom throughout all mankind. Whenever you can oppress someone, the way you can oppress them is first academically, because if they don't know better, then how can they really strive to do better? If all of what they know has such a low bar, then that's going to be ultimately where they seek to achieve at best. And even with the Emancipation Proclamation, there were slaves who thought it was better to remain slaves. Forget the economics. It's what they were used to. It's what they were comfortable with. Of course, we don't have to go any further, or let's go further. We can look at everything that's involving the reality of the Israelites with Moses and how they were allowed to be set free from the Egyptians. The struggle they had the most was that they were geographically no longer in Egypt, but personally, Egypt still was in them. And so that whole education piece is what's really big even today. And so with Juneteenth rather, a lot of that is what took place. So yes, at different points in times and different levels and different communities and or regions, it was accepted, not accepted all over. But the point of the matter is, and I wanted to wait and save this for last, but I can't. Juneteenth is accepted now as a national holiday. What does that tell you?
It's only been that for 4 years or 3 years.
2, 3 years? Yes.
Yeah, so, as a white person, I didn't know that it even existed prior to 2020. And outside of the pandemic, there was such racism happening and discrimination in the country as well that it spurred us being aware of Juneteenth and what that was. But most of us didn't know what it was not taught in our schools.
Mhm.
We learned about the Emancipation Proclamation. But with that, you think, well, we had a white president that signed it into law. And so part of my thinking now is it was to highlight that, and I'm sure in school you don't have time to go into every detail of that, but majority of us didn't even know that it existed prior to 2020.
Well, you mentioned in schools and what was taught to us, and that was taught to us, the Emancipation Proclamation was taught to us, but nothing else was really taught to us about our heritage, the heritage of our people. I mean, it was slavery was mentioned, and as we was taught, but other than that, that was basically it. And Brother Marv, you mentioned the Israelites coming out of Egypt, led by Moses, and many of those Israelites, they were probably afraid of what was ahead. They wasn't sure about the Most High having Moses lead them out. And so therefore, that's why they were kind of like rebellious towards Moses and the Most High, because they were scared of moving forward into the promised land.
They didn't know anything else.
They didn't know anything else.
They were there for 400 years.
400 years. Just like you mentioned the slaves, some of them was probably content with what they had. They had a place to stay. They could probably still farm the land, and they were scared of change.
Right.
So, yeah. And, Juneteenth to me is it's just a celebration of where we come from and how the country see us now and saw what we've been through, and acknowledge what we've been through. And we just celebrated with parades, stuff like that, and acknowledgement of what was going on.
Right. Even for us, as Christians, we acknowledge Good Friday and that Jesus died on the cross. And we need to acknowledge that, otherwise Easter has no purpose for us. So we need to acknowledge those things and what happened in our own histories. And so, as a white person, we hear a lot about Juneteenth and sometimes get anxious about that. Why do we need to celebrate it? Why does it need to be a national holiday? And some just say, well, I get an extra day off of work, which we shouldn't treat it like that. Even other holidays, I'm starting to learn Memorial Day, learn more about why we have that day off. It's not just an extra day off to start summer. It's significant to that. People sacrifice their lives and their families sacrificed for us to have the freedoms in this country. And so, I think we get anxious about Juneteenth. What does it mean? But also finding we need to learn more about it. That it's a story of our nation. We can't escape our past. It's part of who we were. None of us personally were there to do that. But as I learned a few years ago, we had Native American Ministry Sunday at our church, and a Native person came and spoke about similar things and saying, yeah, none of us were oppressive to Native Americans, but none of us were there and put Jesus on the cross either physically, but yet all of us put Jesus on the cross. And so in the same way, we physically weren't there, we didn't own slaves, our ancestors may or may not have, but as Americans, it's part of our history. And it's actually, the effect of that is still being felt. Slavery existed here for 400 years, It's not even been 200 since the Emancipation Proclamation. So the trauma involved in that as a nation, we need to work through that.
You have people still in this country that will say to people of color, they would mention that they acknowledged it happened, but it was a curse.
Right. Yeah.
The white people, your parents, they will acknowledge that it was a curse. Mm-hmm. And if you read the book of Deuteronomy, it'll tell you about the curses and why they happen. You know, because of the rebellion of the Israelites. You know, so the Most High set a curse on them, and it tells you all about it in that book. So, and so the people will say, well, you know, it was meant for them to go through that. But you know,
yeah. Well, you know, as Mark mentioned earlier, you know, every culture at some point has this system of oppression and those being oppressed. It doesn't justify, it doesn't make it right.
right.
It's just a terrible reality. And so even though it happened, doesn't mean we shouldn't acknowledge it or try to learn moving forward, try to do better, make sure it never happens again.
Exactly.
You know, as people, as American citizens, we have to make sure. And as Christians, we need to make sure that it doesn't happen again for anyone in this country. You know, and some of, you know, as a white person, we feel anxious about, you know, what does it mean for us? Why do we have to celebrate it? It happened so long ago. None of us were alive. Can we just all get over it? You know, my first feeling is no, because if we know anything about trauma, if anyone's been through trauma is a lifelong journey that we are navigating. But also communities can be traumatized. And so trauma, you don't just move past it easily. It's with us a long time. We have to continually work through that. So I'll let you two share your thoughts on that and why it's important for us to still acknowledge this even today.
Well, for me, it's important in this regard. I've been just really reflecting a lot leading up to this, and I look back at a lot of things of how I grew up. My parents were from the South, and so they were involved in the Great Migration moving north because of the opportunities for jobs. I think that at that point in time, our country was in the midst of what we would call industrial season. So everything was based on industry. But I look at some of the things they went through, and I look at the times when I had my moments where I spent every Friday with my grandmother at her bedside. And I would have her tell me stories about her experience at the beginning of the 20th century, and some of the things that she experienced in Alabama, you know, near the Florida border. And those kinds of things, this was already in effect. Juneteenth was a celebration already taking place, but it was taking place generally in areas that either someone historically knew about it and made it a point to celebrate it, or in areas where Black businesses dominated the geography and they celebrated it. And so I would listen to these stories and I'm like, my goodness, the things that my grandmother went through. Not that I haven't had some similar experiences, not to the same life or death kind of scenario, but when I look at what she went through and all those days I would sit at her feet and let her tell me stories, understanding that was way before email and text messages and all the social messaging that's out there. Information back in this day and time, even as we've seen as far as how it got expanded, how it started, information was given or transferred by word of mouth outside of, you know, your town hall meetings where you had horseback riders that would take notes and then deliver those meeting notes to the next town. But most information was handed down via mouth, word of mouth. And so I look at that and then I fast forward to today. Are things where they need to be? No. Are they better? I can say that in my life, I've seen them get better. I'm a little alarmed at kind of how it's doing a little backsliding today, but I mean, it's better than what it was in the beginnings of my life and seeing things happen. The fact, if my grandmother were alive today, she'd be celebrating. She'd be celebrating Juneteenth because she knew about Juneteenth. Okay, like a lot of other historical things that we some know about, you know, like the Black Wall Street kind of scenario, that kind of thing. I was taught that when I was in grade school, but I was taught that because I had neighbors who had parents, or they were children at the point in time when that was going on. And so I was taught those things word of mouth. And so I learned a lot of these. I didn't need a national holiday.
Yeah.
You know, so I was, that word of mouth got the information to me, and it became a part of my thought processes for today. Not from the point of being an angry black man. No, I'm not trying to say that. I mean, I can be that, but I'm not trying to say that. I'm saying that it gave me the information to be able to process other things that are going on around.
My mom, she came from Nashville, Tennessee, and so she experienced a lot of racism down there, but she also migrated up here to Cleveland, Ohio, because of the work, you know, and as a young person in the early '60s, growing up, I kind of like knew certain places I could go and couldn't go, and if I went to those places, I was kind of like timid, afraid, and I could expect some type of backlash from certain people as to why am I here? What are you doing here? And you know, you don't belong here. So, but I just think we have made some progress in certain people acknowledging what we went through, and it has gotten better slightly, you know, little by little, as to what we can achieve and gain and what we can have as a Black people. But you know, we still got a long way to go, I think, because we're still looked at as an inferior people, you know, and that I don't think that'll ever change in my lifetime. But you know, I mean, I have a lot of white friends, and we get along good together. But you know, there are some out there that still kind of look at you sideways, you know, and you know, you may hear go back to Africa or something like that, or you know, I mean, well, why don't you go back where you're from?
Right.
You know, you wasn't. This is not your country, really.
Right.
You know, this is not. You guys stole this country. You know, so I mean, it just works both ways. So, but we have shown some progress.
And what are the products that you've seen, or what are the things that you have today that you didn't have access to even 30, 40, 50 years ago?
Well, jobs, education. Whereas back in the '50s and '60s, the schools couldn't get integrated. You know, I mean, they tried that in it was Little Rock, Arkansas, Arkansas 9. You know, they had to have National Guards to escort those Black kids into schools. You know, we couldn't get into certain universities, colleges, but you know, but that slowly changed, and now, you know, we couldn't live in certain areas. You know, we were kind of like restricted to the projects, or restricted to certain areas. You know, restricted to food stamps and stuff like that.
Right.
But now you know, the opportunity is there for us, and it has changed over the years. We're able to use our education, our resources, and we're able to get a piece of the American dream.
Things I've seen that have changed really echo along with what Eric just shared. I believe so much of it depends on education. Because education is really, education is at the base of who people become based on really the education they have. Now, I'm not speaking just academically, although that's a very, very key part of it. I would be remiss if I didn't make a statement that comes out of the 60s. And that was, there was a statement that was there by certain oppressors, you know, identify it that way.
Okay, understood.
Yeah, far be it from me to be tactful, but anyway, the statement was that if you wanted to hide something from a person of color, you put it in a book. And when I heard that, and that was given to me by my father, when that was given to me, I made it my business on that day that I'm going to become a reader, and you're not going to hide anything from me. Well, that was in the 20th century. In the 5, 6, 7 centuries prior to that, in regards to what was going on in Europe and then leading into America, the oppressors, kept information away from the oppressed then, and it didn't have to be ethnic. They kept it away from certain people so as to maintain the control. Okay, and so for me, education is, as long as God gives me breath, I'll be doing something to improve myself academically. But long and the short of it is, I've seen those changes and those things that happen. And then I speak to my dear friend David's generation. Technology accelerated. Okay, Google and everything else on the internet opened up. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. The bad is because your generation was inundated with information. Okay, so then it makes it harder to make a decision because you got all this stuff flowing in. But the good thing is that when done properly, from that place you have access to information that was once hidden. Because the filters that exist in hardcover books don't exist in the same level on the internet. So you can find information if you take the time to dig and you use the proper search engines, if you will, to be able to come to that information. So I've seen those changes, but I'm also starting to see on the flip side of that, how certain people, and I'm going to go back to the term oppressors, are becoming very uncomfortable with that. Because what was once hidden has now been revealed, it's now open, or is now easy access, or now it's not as easy to control as it once was.
Right. And the internet really opened up a lot of things for a lot of people. Almost too much stuff. But anything you need, you can almost find on the internet. Mm-hmm. So that knowledge is there if you're willing to pursue it. You know, so one of the questions, you know, why does it matter then that schools were integrated starting in the 50s and 60s?
I'll chime in on that first. Well, because that's a good question. The schools that were set up for the Black people, I mean, they didn't really learn. The same opportunity wasn't given to them like in the white schools. In the white schools, you had the best teachers, you know, the best educators. But in the Black schools, it was just a get them in there, get them out. You know, they wasn't, the resources wasn't there. Wasn't the same. Mm-hmm. So once, I mean, you had some Black people that knew this, and they wanted that same opportunity, but the white folks didn't want to give them that opportunity. So, but eventually, we were given an opportunity to immigrate.
Just, all of us, we want that chance.
Yeah.
Of education.
Yes.
So that we want, because everyone has the same opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
The same things to have access to it. I think that's what all of us want. And so, thanks for sharing that.
Well, on that same level, for the point of integration, the process really to get there, if we look at it post-secondary, that's where HBCUs came into play. And so those historically Black colleges and universities started to provide the opportunity to acquire, to achieve certain levels of academia, if you will, based on being Black. Although I look at a lot of the HBCUs now, that they're also starting to get on the integration piece, they're starting to get a lot more white students.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because they want that particular experience. Okay, I'm just here to tell you that experience is so invaluable, it's priceless. Okay, so yeah, the obvious, the level of resources is higher, was higher prior to, but the interaction is really what is going to make the change. When students of different ethnic backgrounds are allowed to be in the same environment, and they're talking to three brothers who have all gone to college, and the different people we met because we went to college that we wouldn't have met if we stayed in our own neighborhood.
Right.
Okay, help to expand our understanding of other cultures. And so when I look at that side of it, so part of the process was to go through the HBCUs to try to fill in that particular or bridge that gap academically, which has brought things to now where we still have, like you said, we have a long way to go, but it has improved. My only concern when it's all said and done on the integration, on the academics, on all of that we do not allow the oppressors to cause us to backslide into, to lose ground for what has been achieved where we come forward. I look at, and still on the mindset of Juneteenth, I look at some things that have occurred in the last 5 years against people of color. The people who protested the most were the young college-age students, Black and white. They're the ones who pitched the biggest fit. When we look at some of the shootings and all these other things that have gone on, it wasn't Black or white that was in attention or in the meetings or in the times or in the protest marches. It wasn't just white or Black. They were together. Okay, and for me, it just goes back to other things that have occurred historically in our country. Because the older I get, the more of a historical buff I become. But it was the same thing in the 60s. It was the white and Black. Now, don't get me wrong, you still had your different segments on the extreme of either side. But the masses were integrating together, moving forward, pushing elements forward that were flying against the stream of what was acceptable at that time, as far as what the norm was. It was the young folks who got together and said, well, what you're doing doesn't make any sense. I ain't mad at your mom or dad, but what you're doing, what you're telling me doesn't compute. And so that's where the change really began. So my hope, my prayer is that doesn't get quenched as well.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a great melting pot in America happen right now, which is great, I think. But also some resistance to that, especially in politics. So, but I think it's the resistance is trying to hold on to what was, to that power. But I think that the momentum is so strong that it won't be quenched. That we're coming back into this melting pot. But then the question is, going forward, who then is oppressed? Do we make sure that everyone has a voice and access to things that's needed, or are we excluding some people? And I think it's always the struggle when you come into power. There's always this dynamic of then who is left out
Right.
of that. So we need to be aware of that. Prime example of this melting pot. Marv and I are both, our churches in Cuyahoga Falls, and it was known for many, many years as Caucasian Falls. And now it is under 70% white in Cuyahoga Falls, which was in the last 5 years that has happened. And the city's been very open to welcoming that. In fact, July 13th in Cuyahoga Falls on Front Street downtown is the first city-sponsored multicultural festival in Cuyahoga Falls. In Cuyahoga Falls, a multicultural festival celebrating diversity in our community, the local schools in Cuyahoga Falls School District, over 20 languages spoken in those schools, which even 10 years ago, it was 100% white schools. And so we see that happening in Cuyahoga Falls, which I think is showing what's happening in America. There's this melting pot of people. Doesn't mean there's not issues to work through, but it's not just white or black. It's people are coming together out of necessity. And I think truly the vision of what we wanted America to be originally.
Well, even as you say that, it's what America really is.
Mhm.
I mean, we're looking at the dynamics of ethnics. Again, regardless of who is the oppressor and the oppressed, the ethnics of this country is so diverse. It was built on that.
Right.
There's no, I'm going to try not to get too emotional here. There's no, the only natives born in this country were already in this country.
Right.
Just to chime in on an earlier statement, it's a statement of fact.
Yeah.
Okay, so we all have a prior origin. If we just look at ancestry.com, we all have a prior origin. And so, but the country by word was built on diversity by word, in the print, in the declaration, in the preamble, and all of that. And so it's manifesting, and that's creating issues. And so even when I look at this by word of mouth and all these kind of things that we're talking about on Juneteenth, and you had mentioned the title of Caucasian Falls, by word of mouth from my father, he taught me, and it still exists in a couple of different places in the country. He taught me about the sundown law. And so he equipped me on how to deal with that if for some chance that any law enforcement officer would catch me in this fair city or other surrounding areas, that I would know how to handle myself. Okay, but that was word of mouth. And it was no different than the word of mouth they had to deal with, although theirs was life and death was more rampant in the response. Life and death is still happening, but it's not as rampant as it was at the beginning of Juneteenth.
Right. So sundown laws are, if you're a person of color, you had to be out of this community by sundown.
Yeah.
Or it could mean your life if you weren't.
I grew up in a city, Cleveland. And then eventually my mother had enough resources to move us to East Cleveland. At that time, East Cleveland was considered a nice suburb. They still had industries there, big car dealerships, all kind of businesses. And but at one point, we wasn't really allowed to go up in East Cleveland. Then if we were caught going through East Cleveland, I didn't experience it, but you just hear the stories. You get pulled over. The cop want to know, what are you doing over in here, in this area? But slowly, we moved to East Cleveland in 1968, 69, right after the Huff riots. And speaking of the Huff riots, we, the oppressed people, the Black nationalists was trying to make a statement, which, who knows if it was the right one or the wrong one, but they made it, and they started the riot. So right after those riots, my mom was able to move us to East Cleveland. And at that time, East Cleveland, it was slowly migrating to, blacks, and slowly but surely, it became all black because the 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 oppressors didn't really want to live by the oppressors,
Right.
the oppressed people. So now East Cleveland it's like the Wild Wild West.
Yeah.
So that's how it is with. And so, like right now, me and my wife, we both retired. We live in Monroe Falls, which is a nice, quiet community. Um, and matter of fact, we're maybe the only black family in our condominium complex. So they don't look at us any differently, but who knows what they're really thinking?
Right.
I don't know, but it's changing slowly. We're able to live in certain areas, without backlash. So,
You and I have to talk. I grew up in Cleveland
oh, did
on the
you?
west side,
Okay, yeah.
and so for first, second, and third grade, we were bused to the east side for the integration. And we go across the Lorraine Carnegie Bridge.
Yeah.
So if you listen, the Guardians, those
Yeah,
towers. That's
those
what they're named
towers.
for.
Yes, yeah.
I didn't know it at the time. I thought they were kind of scary.
They kind of satanic, really. To be honest with you,
Yeah.
they are.
But if you know Cleveland, so there's the Cuyahoga River, which is actually the river that comes down to Cuyahoga Falls. Yes, the river that caught on fire also. But on the west side of that was predominantly white, especially in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
And then on the east side of the river was black. And there wasn't much interaction until they started busing. But then my neighborhood in the 80s and 90s became more diverse over time.
Yeah.
And it was a big issue for a lot of people.
Yeah, busing. They didn't like that. I believe they started that busing maybe in the early '80s.
Yeah.
But see, the community I lived in, East Cleveland, it was our own separate entity, our own city. So
Right.
we didn't have to deal with busing.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I was born in '79. So when I was 5, I went. So probably one of the first few years when I was in school, that was when they started busing there. And so that it's Cleveland very interesting with the racial dynamic over the years. But I want to transition us to another part of this discussion. So we're sitting here at Love Akron, and in downtown Akron, Ohio, and here locally, there's been some commotion, I guess is the way to put it nicely, about Juneteenth celebrations here in Akron. So if you don't know, Akron leadership canceled the Juneteenth celebrations around the city, and now just behind us here at the John S. Knight Center, they're having a Juneteenth celebration inside the building. So I want to give you both some space to share your thoughts and to be open and honest about, what we've witnessed in Akron these past few weeks with the city leaders, and then how does it make you feel? And we invite you to be honest about that. How does it make you feel to see what's taking place with these events here?
Well, Marv I'm not really from this area, so I don't really know too much about the dynamics of the Juneteenth in this area, or politics.
Well, having grown up here, Juneteenth was celebrated in West Akron. I'm looking back at the late 70s, 80s, and moving forward. There was a young man who has since passed on. He would put up a booth, put up a big area, and he would do entertainment and have speakers and music and all kinds of concessions. And a couple of years, he actually asked me to come and share and speak. And so for me, that was really the beginning of an in-depth understanding of it for me. And so to shut it down, I have really a myriad of different opinions about it. Number one, because I've met the new man, number one, I can understand the kind of pressures he's under at this current time with all the madness that has taken place since his inauguration. Okay, so he was just inaugurated this year.
Right.
And so he's had a whole lot of social issues to battle. And so for him, he was trying to, the way I view it anyway, he was trying to minimize more madness. Now, on the other side of that, prepare for it. If you really believe that that's going to happen, then you're the mayor.
Right.
You are the president of Akron, Ohio, and you, I believe, should be able to meet with other leaders. Let's start with church leaders, to meet with them, to have them present at these different events. There was several of those events that were scheduled throughout the city. Have your church leaders there, and as backup, whatever police officers, the Akron Police Department, Summit County Sheriff, all of those, have them on alert for any potential madness that could take place. The only way I believe we're going to get past, or let's just say one of the ways we're going to get past some of the dynamics of the things that we're dealing with the violence in particular, is to address it head on. And how do you address it head on? Not violence for violence, but I mean by having neighborhood leaders, having people who are living in that neighborhood, the influencers, the people who are really speaking for that neighborhood, have them, and in particular, and I say it again specifically, church leaders present. Okay, because I believe that that'll help to change some of the things. Now, I'm not saying that that represents some sort of magic pill. I'm not saying that, because crazy is just as crazy is, and I know, because I've had some experiences up in East Cleveland from a referee perspective that made me not want to return. Okay, and that's not that I'm afraid, just that wisdom says, stay away from that. If you know it's there, try to avoid it. But I'm saying that there's enough crazy out there still. But if we move forward in it, and if people, if church folk, if Christian people, and from that perspective, any worldview at this point, speaking of community things, speaking of Juneteenth, spend time in prayer to bathe that in prayer, and then have all the other elements that I previously mentioned there, and move forward with it. Because not moving forward with it, to me, is a victory for the oppressor.
Is when you piggyback off that, by not moving forward, and then when the mayor and whoever else decides to move forward, that could be a lot bottled up in people and just wait to let it out. Oh, now, okay, we can have this now, so they move, But I believe my point is that the city doesn't really want to put up with that madness. That's the bottom line. That's the bottom line. But like Mark said, there's no plan in place to combat that. And I don't know if there is a good plan that can be in place to combat that. Because this is a pretty big city, a lot of oppressed people. So, I don't know.
And I think something people, so it seems from what we understood was like just the Juneteenth events were canceled. No other city events were canceled. And so that raises lots of questions. Why just those events? And that, part of this came from the city council of Akron initiating this. So there's that dynamic. And, Juneteenth we knew was coming. It's been a national holiday for several years. If you're having city events on city property, you have to apply to do that through the city. So you're right, Marvin, that we knew this was coming. It's not a surprise. It wasn't just people popping up doing something. This was planned probably since last Juneteenth. And so equipping the city to do that, and so this is, well, we didn't have enough police. Well, why? Why is there not enough police available to monitor this? And part of what we're sort of triggered early in June, there was a mass shooting in Akron, which seemed to be at a birthday party. They had not found a suspect yet. That seemed to be the trigger, city council, to say we have to cancel all Juneteenth. And I say that because one of the letters they put out as a response to doing this was, there is a lot of violence in the African American community. They only pointed out in the African American community, which I'm saying from my perspective, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that seems as a way of shaming the Black community. Seeing there's much violence in that community, when in reality there's violence everywhere, and people commit violence to those that they're around. And so I think from my perspective, it's a way to scapegoat the African American community. Say there's too much violence in that community, that we had to do this because they don't know how to take care of themselves. So let me know if my understanding is wrong or.
Well, your understanding is right, I think, because that's what the people see on the news. That it's the Black population that's causing and doing
Right.
the fighting, the shooting, causing the trouble, and I don't really see where you got a white mob doing these things, unless I'm missing it, but it's basically the Black folks, and the people council know that,
Right.
and they don't want to have to deal with that. That's the bottom line. That's I wasn't here last year. Did they have this Juneteenth celebrations last year, or?
I think they did, but there was also some promotion
Okay.
around it as well. It seems to always be around Juneteenth in Akron.
Yeah.
And so, but it also seems to me that if you take away a special day from people to celebrate that then opens up to the possibility of violence among any community, because you're taking away their voice. Those holidays, it's a way of sharing our voice of who we are. So to take that away, you're causing more anxiety and frustration, to where eventually it may come out violently. So maybe that's to go say, well, look, see, they're violent, or just weren't thinking that far ahead.
Well, I think, like Brother Mark said earlier, there has to be a plan in place, or a change of events, and just see where that goes.
Well, even as you say that, a thought just came to mind that Juneteenth is very important historically, and in particular for African Americans, Black. That it's a big to do, and it's a step forward in all of what we've been speaking about as far as the progression. The first really big thing we got was Martin Luther King Day. Okay. And there's still a whole lot of angst surrounding that with certain people. But that was a step forward. Okay. And then Juneteenth becoming a national holiday, another step forward. Okay. And so, as opposed to these events, as important as they are, as important as the steps are, as important as those two events are, there needs to be other events during the course of the year that kind of soften the angst that exists with different people groups, because they're making it an annual thing. What about the other 364 days?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think we need to recognize those events. A few weeks ago in Akron, they had the Black Excellence Art Festival. My wife and I went with our kids, and it was incredible for us. We wish we had more money to buy something, because we know how important it is to support all artists. But it was just a wonderful event just to see, and to to highlight that every culture has art and artistic ability, and they share that art, and we need to see those things, be a part of it, so that when Juneteenth arrives, you not just feel like you're shocked, like, oh, this is happening, we didn't know. We know it's happening, it's on the calendar, and so celebrating other parts of the year.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
But I think what you just mentioned, Dave. Maybe the city could have some type of Black expose art shows, or
Right.
something on the inside
Right.
on Juneteenth.
Right. Yeah, because, canceling events, it also then took income away from all the vendors,
Mhm.
from all the Black vendors who signed up. And so, that affects them financially too and their well-being because they invested, you prepare for each event as a vendor. And so it took that income away from them. So we know it's coming again next year. So I think we got to all do better of doing that, and I feel frustrated for you. This, from my experience, to have during COVID, we had to make adaptations to Christmas and Easter with our church. We've got to celebrate Christmas and Easter somehow, and so we had to do it online. But to take those things away from us, for us whose history is not Juneteenth, understanding if a holiday was taken away from us, how would that make us feel, and the impact that would have on us. And so then we can understand the angst caused by that. And pray for our leaders of Akron. We have a new mayor who's only been inaugurated for a few months, and the burden. He's a person of color. He's Muslim, and so the burden that he carries, trying to navigate that in this city that is greatly complex and greatly diverse.
Be quite as a step, because we all live in suburbs of that. It affects the suburbs as well. I mean, because there's always going to be a kind of ripple effect.
Right.
The impact may initially not be the same as it's been here in Akron, but there is a ripple effect.
Right. Yeah, especially in Cuyahoga Falls, which if you go north here, it's just over the bridge, and Cuyahoga Falls is very diverse now, and so what happens in Akron affects the falls greatly in the past few years, and the ripple effect of that. For a while there were riots and protests in Akron. Well, in the falls we felt that, but also here in the suburbs. Okay, where can I go in downtown Akron if I need to come down here? Because roads change and that. Is it safe to come down? And what you're hearing on the news than what you're hearing people who are directly involved. And that could be two different stories. And so it has a great impact on us to cancel it under a week before it's supposed to take place.
I know, living in Cleveland, I would watch the news a lot. I would always see Sumner County, Akron.
Right.
And my wife would watch the news and he would say, "Oh, there's Sumner County again. There's Akron.
Right.
They're cutting up."
They cut.
And it was true.
Yeah.
But when you have oppressed people who feel that they're getting a bad shake,
Right.
that can happen.
Right.
But that's not an excuse because the opportunities are there.
But then you have access to those opportunities. The big thing is work for people. If there's no viable work, that causes a lot more anxiety for people, and so you're trying to find a way to deal with that. Especially for men of any color, if you can't work to take care of your family, the effect that has on you emotionally and mentally and physically, what you think about yourself, and you're standing in your community, and that. So having work opportunities really impacts people. We've come up to about 1 o'clock, so I want to give you both opportunity to share anything you'd like to share on why it's so important for us, people of any race, of any color, to recognize and to celebrate Juneteenth.
Well, it's important. Just like you got other nationalities that celebrate their heritage. So I think it's important for the African community to celebrate the Juneteenth, just as any other. You got the Greek festivals, you got all kind of different festivals. They're celebrating their heritage, and they're letting everyone know. So I feel Juneteenth is just as important.
Okay, thank you.
Same for me, and piggybacking off of what Eric had shared. It's important because it's worthy of celebrating just because of the journey it took to get there. And I don't undermine anybody else's journey, but I'm saying the journey it took to get there, to be able to celebrate Juneteenth, all of what that stands for, what it came out of. It's like doing a Bible study. I can't just read a verse and then have a true understanding of what the verse says. If I don't know the rest of the chapter, if I don't know the history of the author, if I don't know all those things, I don't have a full understanding of what the verse is saying. Well, in this country, Juneteenth is important if we understand first where it came from. Why is it important? What role did it play in this country's history? And then there's great value to that. And just as Eric said, we celebrate Italian Day, we celebrate Greek Day, we celebrate a lot of other ethnic backgrounds. And that's not to take anything away from them. That is to show that Juneteenth is every bit as worthy of a celebration as the other.
Amen.
Amen.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining us today. And those of you watching online, we appreciate you tuning in. Today is Juneteenth. Make sure you look online, understand the history of Juneteenth and the significance for the African American community, but also for the United States of America. We thank Love Akron for allowing us to broadcast here today. Check out their website at loveakron.org to see all the wonderful ministry opportunities that they are doing in Akron. And we'll see you on our next episode of Ask the Pastor.